Climate crisis and COVID-19, a chronic combination. For more than 6 months, Australia was under siege. Last summer's bushfire crisis was on a scale the country had never seen before. More than 24 million hectares scorched. That's an area larger than the 2019 California fires and the Amazon rainforest fires combined. It's an area more than twice the size of South Korea. Nearly 3 billion animals were killed, more than 3,000 homes were destroyed, and dozens of lives lost in a bushfire emergency that had the world watching on in horror. Today, the extensive damage is still evident, and before Australians could even think about recovery, coronavirus hit. Bushfires, coupled with the coronavirus pandemic, catapulted the country into an unprecedented economic crisis. Wind, water, and fire. The soundtrack to a bushfire emergency. In the week before Christmas in 2019, multiple uncontrollable fires had been raging for 2 months. Across the country, 9 people had already died, and by the end of summer, the death toll rose to 33. Fanned by winds exceeding 100 kilometres per hour, a ring of fire had converged onto this small town of Balmoral, about 8 kilometres from Sydney. As you drive into Balmoral, you can see a fire scar remains. And some greenery has started to grow, but that's really symbolic of the entire village, that despite some progress, the wounds here are still raw.
Unfortunately, this is where both of those guys died.
BRENDON O'CONNOR is one of the most experienced firefighters in his crew, with more than 2 decades on the front lines. But even that couldn't prepare him for what he encountered last summer.
I've never been through such a busy fire season where it was just such extreme conditions and fire like I've never seen before. The only way we could describe it was the gates of hell had been opened up on us, and yeah, they wanted to take us, but we fought.
Good job, brother.
Firefighters were overrun and 2 were killed in an accident when a tree fell onto the road and their tanker rolled over. As the town burned, desperate residents and volunteer firefighters sought refuge in this shed. Victoria had already left the village, but her daughter was one of 45 people cramped up inside. She heard everything unfold over the scanner.
She was telling me that the oxygen's running out in the shed, that it's filling with smoke, and I thought I was listening to the last minutes of my daughter's life.
This was once Victoria's home, a place she called her slice of paradise, but now it's a harsh reminder of the frightening ferocity that flames can hold. This pile of dirt still sits with the backdrop of blackened trees, and even more remarkable, the homes around her remain untouched. A physical divide of heartbreak and relief. And to this day, the smell of smoke still lingers in the air. This is one of thousands of homes across Australia that was not only destroyed, but still, 1 year on, hasn't been rebuilt. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has put any recovery momentum right on hold.
Specifically when you've got a whole village with PTSD, isolating isn't helping. It's not helping at all.
Victoria has been forced to ask for donations online so she can get a caravan like this. These are temporary homes, the result of a climate catastrophe. This is located in the state of Victoria, a place where the rebuild has been hampered by 2 coronavirus lockdowns.
A lot of the experts, that there might only be 2 or 3 or 4 of them that do that work, come out of Melbourne. That's where they're based. So it's really slowed down the ability to to get those responses.
It's volunteers like Kate that are helping the Buchan Valley community, a place that lost 26 homes to last season's bushfires. The houses here are separated by regrowing greenery, but are tied together in tragedy. We are starting to see some activity resuming in the seaside tourist town of Lakes Entrance. This year, most of the region's annual 1.4 million visitors have stayed away. Tourists cancelled their trips during the fires, and the pandemic put a pause on future bookings.
It's very seasonal. A lot of the businesses down here rely on it. I guess it's all shops. It's the little sort of gift shops, takeaway shops, restaurants. It really is the life of Lakes Entrance.
Many businesses reported losing as much as 90% of their income. It's only now that authorities have lifted Victoria's second lockdown that local residents can finally see the prospect of an economic recovery.
Yeah, so within 15 minutes of the announcement, the phone was ringing, people booking in from Melbourne.
The pandemic has wiped an estimated $130 billion off the Australian economy this year, while last summer's bushfire season cost Australia more than $7 billion. But for the firefighters, the largest cost isn't just to the economy. The COVID-19 pandemic has crippled their preparation work.
Psychologically, I've had quite a lot of issues, particularly anger. I don't have a clearance at this point to be on the truck. We've really not been able to do a lot of preparation work for this upcoming season to get our heads in the right place.
Unprepared and under pressure, the next bushfire season has begun. Every year, uncontrollable fires are starting months earlier and lasting longer. Scientists say a direct result of global warming. It's prompted Australia's Bushfire Royal Commission to issue a stark warning that traditional prediction models and firefighting techniques may not match up against a fast-warming climate. EWAN Waller is a fifth-generation farmer and a former forest fire manager. Mr. Waller says farmers have to adapt to the changing, drier conditions. But he also wants more national action on climate change and better preparedness.
It's got to be invested and got to be supported, otherwise we'll be continually burned out and losing animal life, human life, can't continue on as we are.
Fires are an inevitable part of life in Australia, but with climate change, they're now forcing people to live differently.
To try and see the reason to change what we're doing and to, for God's sake, everyone, it's one planet. You know, let's all pull together.
These moments are historic, but they are a result of a very modern problem. The people here hope the lessons learned in this country will resonate worldwide in the fight against climate change.
Surging COVID-19 cases in many parts of the world have triggered new lockdowns and other restrictions as the festive season approaches. Here in Seoul, South Korea, nightclubs and karaoke bars are closed, while there are fresh curbs on eating in cafes and restaurants. And New York is on the brink of another city lockdown as COVID-19 cases reach their highest levels since April. For nearly 4 decades, Park Young-oh has been going out to sea to catch a variety of fish, like crabs and octopus in South Korea's Western Sea area. But he takes a break during winter, when he's usually busy organizing an annual salted shrimp festival here at Gangwon Island. He says that during this festival, residents can boast about their catch and show off their salted shrimps, widely known to be superior than others across the country. These salted shrimps are the pride of Gangwon because about 70 to 80% of the country's salted shrimps come from this island. But this year, the annual Salted Shrimp Festival in Gangwon has been cancelled due to COVID-19. Though Mr. Park is still hopeful it can resume next year.
내년에 코로나만 없다면 뭐 새로 건물도 짓고 보셨잖아요. 들어가서 보시니까 깨끗하잖아요. 아마 내년에 축제를 하게 되면 코로나 뭐 이런 벗어나는 그런 것도 있기 때문에 많이 찾아온다고 생각해요. 올 거라고.
But despite the spike in COVID-19 cases in South Korea, some other festivals are still trying to proceed. Like this fishing festival in one part of Gangwon Island. Now, around this time of the year, this place would be packed with people getting ready to welcome tourists from across the country. This is a winter festival that's held usually in mid-December. People who run the festivals, like Hong Jong-woo says, he's just hoping the situation will improve in December.
아직 취소된 건 아니고요. 결정을 갖다 아직 못 내린 겁니다. 저희 코로나 상황 때문에 그걸 좀 지켜보고서 하려고 그렇게 생각을 하고 있습니다. 방역 수칙을 이제 다 준수해 갖고 해지되는 거가 맞고요. 그리고 이제 변동 사항이 많기 때문에
The COVID-19 situation is slightly better in the Western Sea area of Gangwon than it is in Seoul. The capital city has declared an emergency, saying it was a time to pause after a spike in the number of new COVID-19 cases. And it's urged its residents of about 10 million to stay home. It's worrying times, especially for senior high school students and their parents, after a recent spike in the number of high school students catching the virus.
고등학생 엄마들끼리 모여서 하는 얘기는 저희도 치유가 필요하다는 얘기를 많이 해요. 이제 학교에서 학교에서 해줬던 그런 시스템을 부모가 해야 되잖아요. 부모 역할이 그만큼 커지다 보니 부모들이 겪고 있는 그런 부담감이 말할 수 없이 커요.
The government has recently voiced concerns that the numbers could spike further as the weather gets colder. And with COVID-19 symptoms similar to that of the seasonal flu, health authorities warn hospitals could overflow with patients if precautionary measures are not taken seriously. On Tuesday, the social distancing alert level was raised from 1.5 to 2 for the Greater Seoul area for the first time since August. And this means a ban of gatherings in high-risk facilities like clubs and bars, while restaurants are prohibited from serving customers after 9 p.m.
New Yorkers aren't known for their patience. In a city where nothing but the hottest Broadway tickets or designer sample sale can trigger a queue, now they're waiting in line for hours. For this, clinics offering COVID-19 tests. At least 275,000 New Yorkers have now tested positive in total. And with the rate of infection increasing again, the city has reinstated some of the lockdown restrictions that had been lifted over the summer. Bars and restaurants that had already been limited to 25% indoor capacity must now close at 10 p.m.
I was a destination restaurant, which meant that I was really sort of, my business had to do a lot with tourism. There's not a lot of tourism right now. And we have a lot of restrictions, which I'm not saying there shouldn't be restrictions. I want to keep the city as safe as possible, but it's really hard to run a business with all these mandates. And on top of that, we're not getting a lot of relief.
And Amanda is almost certain that restaurants will soon be forced to close completely, as they were during the city's first lockdown in the spring.
That's what happened to New York's public school system. After partially reopening in September, the families of around 300,000 children that had returned to the classroom were given less than a day's notice earlier this month that schools would shut again. And indoor gatherings across the state have been limited to no more than 10 people.
Hopes are also pinned on the rollout of a successful vaccine, which could be available in the US in early December. But in New York, where low-income neighbourhoods have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, health experts say the authorities must also focus on making sure inoculations reach those most in need.
We're already talking and hearing about the vaccine success. We need to act on it now. All else has not been equitable. What makes us think that vaccine distribution will actually make it to, the hands of those who really need to get it? And once it gets to them, will they trust the vaccine and the authority that gives it to them to take it? So there's a lot more work we can do ahead of time.
But much of the programme to roll out vaccines is likely to take place under the new White House administration of Joe Biden. And with President Trump yet to concede the election, there are concerns that could seriously hamper efforts.
Very recently, there was actually a report that places some of the blame for the 9/11 hijacking on the fact that the Bush-Gore transition was delayed. that a number of the people who could have been in place and responsible for tracking some of that terrorism were not there. So it's not a joke. It's not that just, oh, Trump being Trump. There are real world consequences will happen because Donald Trump has refused to accept his defeat.
New Yorkers had been hoping that the start of a new year would bring new hope for the city's fight against coronavirus. But with 2021 now in sight, feelings are mixed.
I don't think there'll be a lockdown as such, but they'll target specific areas, which have to be locked down.
I think we're headed for a bad winter. I didn't think so before, but I'm starting to think it's going to be.
Just a lot of people not taking it seriously. I mean, that's classic New York.
On the surface, much of life is back to normal here. But another lockdown could do huge damage to a city that hasn't fully recovered from the last one. It's been nearly 8 months since New York became the epicenter of the global COVID-19 pandemic. There are no longer emergency field hospitals or outdoor morgues here, but the memories of those dark days have not left this city nor its residents. Now the threat of a second wave is increasing as the days grow shorter, and New York looks set for a tough winter.
Walking in a sea of beautiful flowers with characters from Alice in Wonderland makes me forget for a moment that many parts of the world are still fighting COVID-19. This is Taichung's International Flower Carpet Festival. Local authorities hope this annual event can help boost local tourism while international border controls are still in place. This year's festival features 250,000 plants, stretching over 1.8 hectares of land. Taichung City has spent $60,000 US and 900 staff to put together the 3-week event.
今年最大的挑战是来自于防疫的工作，因为我们一方面呢，必须要能够落实我们整个防疫的工作，但是另一方面，你又不希望说因防疫的工作坏了民众游览的兴致。
Taichung City expects the festival to attract more than 2.5 million visitors this year, generating some $110 million of output value.
台湾算是做的还不错，所以很多地方大家还是都可以出来玩啊，只有不能出国而已啦。
当然不能出国是现在很多人心中的期盼这样子。对，那当然有这个活动的话，我们就要运用我们有时间的时候就赶快来参加。
Taichung City's efforts are clearly paying off. As Taiwan's second largest city, Taichung has attracted the highest number of visitors so far this year, despite the pandemic.
最近交通部观光局他们公布了一份新的统计数字哈，那今年1到8月的这个全台湾各县市的游客人次的话呢，我们台中市以3200多万人次居冠。
Unlike many parts of the world, Taiwan has not seen any lockdowns since the outbreak of COVID-19, with 0 domestic infection for more than 200 days. The collaborated efforts by the government and local residents have helped contain the pandemic within months. But international border controls have devastated the island's tourism industry. In an effort to revive the sector, the government has pumped in nearly $2 billion to help fuel domestic travel from this summer.
我们台湾的防疫的成效很好，所以以至于就是说在7到10月就有1780万人次的出游，那也创造了直接跟间接的观光效益有达到618亿。
Before the pandemic, Taiwanese tourists spent a total of $40 billion a year, with 2/3 of the amount spent overseas. Now, with international travel restrictions, Local governments like Taichung City are hoping that these tourists can spend locally.
The city government has clearly done well in attracting high number of local tourists in the absence of foreign visitors. But there are still the questions on exactly how much tourism dollars can they bring for local businesses.
So I visited a famous pastry shop in Taichung with 165 years of history. Since the outbreak of the pandemic, the shop is struggling to return to its glory days. Shop owner Cai Wangcai tells me its sales plunged 50% at the start of the outbreak, while the domestic tourism boom has helped businesses recover by 70%. But there is still a big gap to fill, as long as international travels are restricted.
国旅旅客买1盒，外国观光客大概买了5盒。 大概数字大概我们讲的大概5倍以上的数字，而且国外的观光客来都是会集体来买，他不是一个人买。
Mr. Tsai says domestic tourism may provide some temporary relief, but his business cannot sustain solely on local tourists, since they only come on weekends and public holidays. Like many struggling local businesses, e-commerce appears to be the shining light.
因为虽然疫情，可是国外的产品还是可以采购的。那我们能够销售到国外去，那采购上面会希望说，在网络上行销上面直接从网络采购。
Even some hoteliers are still struggling despite the influx of local tourists.
他们主要还是会比较是到大自然、花东、宜兰，那甚至阳明山，好了，那甚至说垦丁。 都好，可是，在我们市区都会型饭店来讲的话，其实，我觉得比较没有什么太大的感受。
Going forward, Mr. Ong says the overall hotel industry still relies heavily on international travel. As long as border controls remain in place, he fears the worst has yet to come for many hotels.
我觉得。 如果以11月现在来看，旅游补助一中断，那其实，各家业者的不管是住房率或者是房价，就呈现腰斩甚至跳楼式的现象的话，我觉得，应该最快到过年前，其实就一波业者应该就没办法到过年了。
Last month, Taiwan government has passed a new special budget of over $7 billion to continue economic relief measures. And it's planning to roll out additional subsidies next year during Chinese New Year. This, as health authorities estimate that the island would only begin opening its borders from the fourth quarter of next year. For business owners like Mr. Tsai and Mr. Ong, the road to recovery will be a long and arduous one. But they both agree that the public safety should come first.
Though Taiwan's experience shows that it's possible to maintain a semblance of normalcy amidst a pandemic, a full recovery will not be possible without a vaccine. Recent reports of encouraging results from vaccine trials certainly gave us optimism that we would soon turn the corner in the fight against the virus. And until we get the all clear, take care and stay safe.